Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing another movie review, so I hope you find this one interesting. This movie is an action/thriller from the United States, English language, released in the year 2014, directed by Adam Wingard, and this film is called The Guest. So The Guest is about a family that are mourning the loss of a loved one. Over in Iraq, he was killed in action, and this guy's left behind a younger brother, a sister, and his parents. So they're trying to contemplate life without this guy, but then one morning, they get a knock on the door from a stranger who claims to be this deceased loved one's friend. Now, he tells the family that he's delivering a dying wish, that this guy wanted to let his family know that he loved them very much. So the family are very grateful for this stranger's generosity. So as a result, they invite him in to stay with them for a few days until this guy can decide what he's going to do with his life now that he's returned. So as the days progress, they start to get a very strong connection. In fact, this guy, because of his charisma and his helpful nature, actually becomes one of the family. But then strange things start to happen around this town that causes the family to suspect that there is more to this guy than they first thought. So whether or not they're onto something is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now, my thoughts on The Guest. As far as Adam Wingard is concerned, I respect him for being a competent filmmaker, but he just lacks that X factor to really make me excited. So for that reason, I hadn't checked out The Guest for so long, is because I just didn't think it was going to be all that memorable. But after seeing so many positive reviews for this film, I finally gave in to temptation and I watched it last night, and I will say that this is definitely Adam Wingard's best film, and although it doesn't live up to the hype completely, it is still a very enjoyable experience that I would highly recommend. I'd happily recommend it to anyone out there if you're after a good old-fashioned B-grade action film. So what I liked about Adam Wingard is that it's clear that this guy has a lot of inspiration from film from the past. He's a student of films from the past, and he's paying a lot of respect to actually what made him a filmmaker in the first place. And it's very evident in The Guest that this guy loves 1980s film, especially 1980s action. And without actually ripping off action films that have come before it, he's using it for inspiration in actually making a modern-day film with a lot of 1980s element. So this is a trip down memory lane for a movie fan, in that you're actually being reminded of films that you've seen before, but it's not a carbon copy of something you've seen before. So it's giving you a little bit of Adam Wingard flavour thrown in there for good measure. So you're actually seeing a movie that you haven't seen before, but at the same time, yes, I'm constantly going back to the days when I was a kid watching VHS Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone films, where it made me a fan of this action in the first place. And so that's what I like. Trip down memory lane, when these films are done properly, it just puts on a massive smile on your face when you're watching it, because it's definitely an exercise in nostalgia. So this director, he uses it very respectfully, and the movie never strives to be something that it's not. It's a very, very entertaining B-grade film, and I think it really ticked all the right boxes. So the visuals are very vivid. It does pay a very strong level of storytelling. It's very reminiscent of Nicholas Winding Refn, even, in that it's very neon lighting. It's very, the colouring is just, it's very vivid, and at the same time very hypnotising. And so when straight from the very first scene, I thought to myself, okay, this is going to be a different style of film. But what really gets you on a 1980s level is the soundtrack. And this is what I loved, and I think this is definitely the film's biggest positive, is that, yes, okay, you're actually hearing music that you've heard before, but it's used in a way where you're giving it a little bit of a new spin. And this is something that Quentin Tarantino does so well in his films, especially Reservoir Dogs with the Steelers Will song called Stuck in the Middle with You. Now, he used that song in a very horrible torture scene, and that's not something you'd associate that song with. So although you've heard it before, although that song came out long before, Reservoir Dogs, Quentin Tarantino is giving you a new perspective of that song. So it feels as though the song is there not just to recap and basically give you memories, but actually give that song a different perspective. And so this is what Adam Wingard does to some extent, is that you've seen things before, but he's giving it that little spin to give you a new perspective of that. And so it feels like, okay, he's not only just recycling it because he doesn't have any other ideas, but he's just giving you that extra to actually make it worth it. And it's like a remake that is done very well, in that it's not a carbon copy scene for scene remake, but it's a remake that is done with its own flavour, but taking inspiration from its source. And so that's what I think the Guest does so well, is that it's not basically copying off ideas from the past, but it's using the influences, it's using the reasons why this director made this film in the first place. And I thought that just basically complements the viewer very respectfully, therefore you can really enjoy it. And as I said, you have a lot of smiles on your face because you are being reminded by all the classics that have come before it. So this is is complemented by an absolutely fantastic performance from the main character. This is a guy who you don't know if he's a villain or if you don't know if he's misunderstood. Why is this guy so conceited? Why is he so defensive with his past? And so because you don't know that, you don't know whether or not this family's in danger. So it creates a lot of suspense from that. And I thought the first half of this film was by far the best, is because you didn't know where the threat was coming from, but you knew something about this guy was a little bit off, but you couldn't quite put your finger on it. So because you don't know whether or not this guy is the fox amongst the hens, I never felt as though this family were in genuine comfort. I thought that this guy was luring them in a false sense of security, and I thought that Adam Wingard has you on a knife's edge. And the fact that the director actually gives you a little bit of insight into this family without going too far actually creates a lot more dread than you would get with just a fuzzy face and, you know, basically cannon fodder. And a lot of these action films, it's all about the action as opposed to the characters. But I thought Adam Wingard does a fairly decent job at actually painting these characters in a fairly sympathetic way because of what this family's gone through in the past. So the overall line of suspense in this film was actually quite unnerving, and then it really pays it off with a very action-packed ending that I thought was very well choreographed, and it will appeal to a lot of action fans. So you do get something a little bit more than just a standard action film, which does elevate itself a little bit, but it doesn't elevate itself quite enough to get out of the B-grade feel. And that's ultimately the film's problem, but at the same time it's not really a negative because the movie doesn't really strive to be anything but a B-grade throwback. And so that's something that I can't really criticize too much, but that's the reason why it's not a masterpiece. But having said that, it's still definitely a film I'd highly recommend. It's hugely enjoyable. Although it doesn't really win me over complete with Adam Wingard, it's definitely a step in the right direction, and as a result of that, I'm going to give The Guest 3.5 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.